video, I'm just going to talk about how to prepare for the road test. So as you know by now, there's several parts to getting your Class 4. First of all, there's the written or there's the knowledge test. And then the next part is your road test, which includes also a test of your pre-trip inspection. And then following that, if you pass, you'll be getting a form to go and get a medical exam, which you will do on your own time. Now, hopefully, since you've had your driver's license for a few years and you've got some driving experience, the road test isn't going to be much of a challenge for you. You know how to drive. You know the importance of shoulder checks. Don't forget to write shoulder check. And you know about driving the speed limit. You know how to make a left-hand turn and how to use your mirrors. One thing I want to say is that before you do the test, make sure you're practicing with the kind of vehicle that you're going to be driving. So if you're planning to drive a 15-passenger van, you should be practicing with a 15-passenger van. How to drive it, how to park it, how to back up with that vehicle, just so that you're very familiar with what you're going to be using that day. And just be aware that the Class 4 license does have a few additional rules, which we will talk about some of them. One is backing up, right? That's a little bit different than your normal driver's license. So probably because you have been driving for a while, you've picked up some bad habits, or maybe you've forgotten some of the rules of driving. So I would really encourage you, again, pick up a manual or go online and just refresh your memory about the rules of the road. In my experience, the road test was not a lengthy part of getting the Class 4. It was maybe a 20-minute drive where we drove in normal city traffic. The examiner was just looking for smooth stops at the light. That makes sense, right? It's common sense that if you're going to be driving with passengers, you don't want to throw your passengers around and make them uncomfortable. The examiner wanted to see that I was shoulder checking and that I was driving within the speed limits, but also that I was driving confidently, because if you're driving under the speed limit, that just looks like you're nervous, and that isn't helpful either. They wanted to see that I could park a vehicle and that I would turn my tires the correct way, either towards the curb or away from the curb, depending if I was on a flat road, downhill, or uphill. They really wanted to see how I handled stopping and backing up. That's a really important one. So make sure that you read the manual on proper procedures for backing up and how that differs when you have a co-pilot in the vehicle, when you can have their help, or how do you do it when you're alone. So read up on that so that you can demonstrate it. It's a serious thing to have a Class 4 license because other people are depending on you to follow the rules and to be someone who will drive safely. So don't just practice up so you can pass, practice up so that you can be an excellent driver.
I'm going to describe the day I took my road test to help you visualize what the day might be like for you. So I arrived at ICBC 30 minutes ahead of time. I always give myself extra time just in case there's a complication with parking, or you want to have a little more time to relax and just kind of collect your thoughts. So I arrived 30 minutes ahead of time. In my situation, I was instructed to park in the truck parking area, but I would encourage you to call your local ICBC office to see where they want you to park. I actually went there ahead of time just to see where the parking area was. The more you can do to kind of set yourself at ease, the better. When I parked leaving room for the pre-test. And what I mean by that is that you're going to need to have room to walk around your vehicle, get down on the ground and look under. So just keep that in mind when you're parking. I also unlocked all my doors. That takes one more step away from what you're going to have to do during the pre-test. So I unlocked all my doors. I also took my insurance papers out of the vehicle because when you check in, they are going to ask to see your papers. The next thing I did was I just arranged certain items on the driver's seat, and I'll give you a picture of that here. So I put my mat on the seat. You might want to use a mat. You might not want to use the mat. Maybe that's just an extra thing for you, but I didn't want to get all dirty on the ground, so I used a mat. Then I had some paper towel and a tire gauge and my hammer, and then I also moved the brush scraper closer within reach so that I didn't have to climb into the van and kind of rummage around. I also did one last check inside the vehicle just to make sure that everything was out of the way. I kind of moved the seat belts aside as much as I could so that when I needed to get to the back of the van, it was easy to do so. And just did a quick look around the van to make sure there was nothing that was going to be problematic. And then, of course, I removed the keys from the vehicle. You don't want to leave your keys in the vehicle. And I made sure to take my own personal items, my purse or wallet with me, not leaving anything of value in the van. Then I went to the ICBC desk to check in. I had my ID ready and I had my fee ready. If you do not know what kind of ID is suitable or what the fee is, just go on to icbc.com to get the most recent fees and requirements. Then I just relaxed and decided to be positive. I also visualized, okay, well, what happens if I fail? Am I going to be super disappointed? No, I'm going to pick myself up, I'm going to figure out what I did wrong, and I'm just going to do the test again. So don't let it deeply discourage you if you don't pass. It's okay. This is a learning process. When I walked with the examiner to the van, I made sure that I was conversational. I wasn't talking their ear off, but I just wanted to be friendly and polite. I also took the time to ask a few questions. Now, they may or may not answer your questions, but you can at least try. You can say, what I was planning to do was check one seatbelt, not all of them, just to save time. Is that acceptable? What I was planning to do was check one tire, but not all the tires. Is that acceptable? What I was planning to do was point out the fluids that I need to check, but I wasn't actually going to check my oil or my transmission fluid. Is that okay, or should I actually check them? They might say, just do what you think you need to do, or they might actually answer your questions. It's worth asking. When we got to the van, the examiner started the pre-trip pretty quickly. So they just said, go ahead, do your pre-trip inspection. And I just proceeded calmly and quickly. If you've practiced, it's common sense. Keep reminding yourself, really, it's common sense. You're just checking everything, right? In an orderly manner. When I had gone through my pre-trip and I was back in the van, my pre-trip actually ended after I did my steering check. The examiner had me turn off the vehicle and fill out a basic form. I've provided a sample of that form on this site. This included things like my name, the make and model of the vehicle I was driving, my license plate number, the amount of miles on my odometer. Remember, I gave you a little tip that you can put your license plate number and the model of your vehicle just in the cup holder, because sometimes when you're doing a test, it's easy to blank out. So just keep that handy. I just want to make a comment about your odometer. So under my terminology video, I go into this a little bit, but I just want to remind you that on the odometer, you can find two sets of numbers. So you can find the actual kilometers of your vehicle, and then there is a trip meter that just records the kilometers of your most recent trip. So make sure you're looking at the right thing. If you're looking at the wrong thing, the examiner is going to think you don't know what you're doing. When I was done filling out the form, the examiner asked me to start the vehicle for the road test. But I just want to say to you, the order of your test may vary. So they might actually stop you before you actually turn on the vehicle to do your brake check and your steering check. They might have you fill out the form at that point so that when you go and do your road test, make sure you don't just drive out of the parking lot. You need to do that brake check and that steering check before you actually do the road test, and they will be watching to see that you remember this. For my actual road test, I drove out of the ICBC lot. I made some basic left and right turns, and I really want to stress shoulder checks because the longer you drive, the more casual people tend to become about this. So not only do we make left shoulder checks, but we make right shoulder checks when we turn right because we're looking for cyclists and pedestrians and people that are scooting around the right side of your vehicle. So make sure that you do a right shoulder check. Then I drove down a city street. I came to some red lights, and what they're looking for when you're coming to a red light is that you're just coming to a smooth stop. So nothing in the vehicle should slide when you're coming to a stop, right? It's a very smooth, non-jarring kind of stop. I drove through a neighborhood area. Then at one point, the examiner had me pull over to park. I was parking on a slight uphill. There was no curb, so I turned my wheels sharply to the right. So I want to remind you, make sure you know how you park on a flat road. Make sure you know how you park on an uphill, a downhill, a hill with a curb, a hill without a curb. Just go back to the manual and review those rules so that you're very clear on it. I also want to mention that I did not have to do a parallel park when I did my test, but that doesn't mean that you won't need to. And I have certainly had to parallel park my 15-passenger van after I passed my test in real life. So you're going to need to know how to do that anyway. So make sure that you practice it up so that if all of a sudden that happens on your test, you are prepared for it. So after I did my parking, I pulled back into traffic when they instructed me to do so. I drove through a school zone, so make sure that you mind your school zones. And then I drove back to ICBC. I parked in the same area along the curb at ICBC. Just want to remind you to be prepared for other scenarios. As I've mentioned already, you might need to go through a roundabout. Do you know your roundabout rules? You might need to turn left with no arrow, like no signal arrow. So make sure that you're up on your left turn rules and how you pull into an intersection properly. Make sure you know your stop sign scenarios. What do you do when there's a four-way stop? What do you do when there's a three-way stop? These are all things that we can get a bit fuzzy on when we've driven for a while. Make sure you know your merging rules. Make sure you know your crosswalk rules. Those are very important things to be mindful of. So again, I want to stress, read your driving manual even if you think you're an excellent driver. When I got back to ICBC and had parked and I turned off the vehicle, the examiner asked that I demonstrate the backing up procedure. There are two ways you can do your backup procedure. You can ask the examiner to help, and in that case, you can ask the examiner, would you mind standing at the back of my vehicle and giving me a thumbs up if everything is clear behind my vehicle? And then you would back up and you would honk your horn at every vehicle length. Make sure you check your driver's manual in case there's updated rules that I don't have in this video. You can also do a backup procedure on your own, and that's the one that I ended up doing. I shut off my vehicle and I walked around the entire vehicle quickly to look for anything that could be in the way. I turned on the vehicle and then I honked and honked at every vehicle length as I backed up. And then when I was finished my backup procedure, the examiner had me turn off the vehicle. The examiner filled out some forms and at that point informed me that I had passed, and I hope the same happens for you.
See you in the next video where I will give you tips for the pre-trip inspection.